Well, hello, dear readers and viewers and listeners. This is Joyce Davis, PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is another meeting of PennLive's Editorial Board. We are doing these editorial board meetings during election season to give candidates an opportunity to speak to you, our readers, our listeners, and our viewers. And we have our editorial board here to ask some questions, pithy questions as usual, and they represent some of the most respected leaders in our community in this region. Today, we are really delighted to welcome U.S. Senator Bob Casey, who is taking time out of a very busy schedule to speak to us. So, with that, I am not going to hold things up because I know you have a lot to do, Senator Casey. I'm going to turn it over to you. Give us whatever your introduction is that you'd like us to know you about you and why you're deciding yet again you want to represent the people of Pennsylvania in Washington. Senator Casey.
Well, Joyce, thank you so much, and thank you to the members of the editorial board for this opportunity and to be able to talk directly to you, but also to speak to so many others who will see this or be able to pay attention to what we've talked about. I'm grateful for the opportunity because I'm running for the office of the United States Senate because I want to continue to fight battles on behalf of the people of our Commonwealth, whether it's battles that we have to fight and win for working families, for our children, for seniors, for people with disabilities, our veterans. So many Pennsylvanians that need an advocate in the United States Senate. I want to continue to fight and win those battles. I'm also anxious to fight against those who I think are thwarting progress in our state. So that means fighting battles against those who want to rig the tax code or rig the courts or bust unions or jack up prices on families, often because of just raw corporate greed. And I'm going to continue to fight against those forces and beat them in the legislative debates that we have in Washington. But look, I think this decision the voters will make in November and some before November is a very clear choice. When it comes to all those battles that I just mentioned, I'm on one side, my opponent's on the other, whether it's tax policy or healthcare, or steps we need to take to secure our border, steps we need to take to help working families reduce their costs, or whether it's debates on basic rights like women's rights, workers' rights, or voting rights. So it's a very clear choice for the people of our state, and I'm anxious to continue in these next, 28 days to compare my record as a public official and as a United States Senator with his record as a hedge fund CEO. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we can get to the questions.
Well, yes, there are definitely going to be questions, but we thank you for giving us that overview. I want to let you know too, Senator Casey, who is here with us. We do have members of our editorial board, and I'll take this time to introduce them to you. It's Dr. Nirmal Joshi, who's president of the Joshi Foundation. It's David Dix, who is one of the founders of the African American Chamber of Pennsylvania. Is that right, David? I hope I have the name right. We have Vinnie Portsline, who is a activist and advocate for people with disabilities. We have Saeed Onal, a businessman in central Pennsylvania, who's also president of the Turkish Cultural Association. We have the well-known Jeffrey Lord, who battles it out with me on Battleground PA every week. We have Gloria Merrick, who is with the Latino Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce. Have I forgotten anyone here amongst our board? I don't think so. I think that's everyone. But I wanted to also let you know we do have two reporters on the line who may ask questions. The very famous Charlie Thompson and Evie DeJesus, who has our own following in our region. So, with that, I'm going to just ask you maybe an opening question and let our editorial board get their questions ready. And that is, as you list perhaps the top three priorities for you in this election, the top three issues. Would you talk about what those are and how you differentiate from your opponent?
Yeah, Joyce, I think I'd start with costs or as more often expressed, cost of living. I think that's what most Americans face every day, especially families that are either struggling to make ends meet, raising children, paying the bills, going to work every day. And I think they are rightfully demanding that we make a lot more progress than we've made as a nation in getting those costs down. Now, we have made some progress. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for Medicare Part D beneficiaries, seniors. That was a substantial win. We're about to experience, starting in January, I should say, seniors will, in January, a $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket expenses for prescription drugs. So that's another cap that's going to be in place to help seniors. So we're beginning to drive down the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I didn't mention, but it's down the road. But now we have a kind of an example in front of everyone about how Medicare has now successfully negotiated 10 prescription drugs that are going to be lower priced because of those negotiations. We also invested in our families with the child tax credit, or I should say the enhanced version of that, drove down child poverty in the country by 40%. We should enact in 2025, and we have a huge tax debate. We should enact, I would hope, the 2021 version of that child tax credit and make sure that families across Pennsylvania, at that time it was the families of 2.2 million Pennsylvania children who benefited from that child tax credit. A lot of middle-class families benefited and families struggling to get to the middle class. So we should make sure that becomes the subject of our attention so that we can continue to drive down costs for families when they go to the grocery store and have to pay either higher prices for food or higher prices for the cost of household items because of the price increases that major corporations heaped upon the families of Pennsylvania. I call it greedflation. And the Federal Reserve told us that corporate profits drove a lot of the inflation, especially in the first 2 years. In fact, the Kansas City Federal Reserve said that from mid-July, or I should say July of 20 to July of 22, corporate profits drove 41% of all the inflation in America. And so corporate profits are driving inflation. Those prices have often stayed far too high because companies can get away with it. They can jack up the prices to any level without any penalty for doing that. What we should do is continue to point it out, pass price gouging legislation to hold them accountable, and thirdly, to roll back those big corporate tax breaks, because obviously they didn't need them, because it seems like they were getting record profits. They were getting record profits, and they were utilizing those big corporate tax breaks mostly for stock buybacks and not really doing much for workers in the process. So I think that's part of the effort going forward to lower prices. We've got to continue to focus on the cost of housing and childcare, basic expenses in the lives of families. So I think I know that's not a 1, 2, or 3. It's kind of a one big one, but I think it's cost of living.
Pocketbook issue seems to be your focus.
Yep.
How are you going to deal with helping working class families, and kind of you want to roll back some of those tax cuts that were put into place by the Trump administration? Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Look, the only time the big guys, the most powerful corporations on the planet and billionaires and wealthy Americans, the only time they lost a tax battle, at least from my opinion anyway, over the last 40 years, is when we passed the American Rescue Plan, and we said we're going to give a substantial tax break through the child tax credit for families raising children, and billionaires aren't getting a tax break. Big corporations are not getting a tax break, and very wealthy Americans who may not be billionaires but are very wealthy are not getting a tax break. But that's the only battle that working families really won handily. It seems like every other time we have a debate about tax policy, the lion's share of the tax breaks go to the most powerful. In fact, my opponent not only supported that 2017 bill, which jacked up the debt by $2 trillion, now he wants to continue all those breaks to jack up the debt, explode the debt by more than $4 trillion. Some people believe it's higher than that, higher than $5 trillion. That would be reckless, fiscally reckless, but would also disadvantage the middle class. What we should do in 25 is give the middle class finally a substantial tax break. And you can't do that if you're going to give away the store to the largest corporations and the most wealthy of Americans.
Very good. Well, I'm going to open the floor or the airwaves to our board here. Does anyone have a question for Senator Casey from the board? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on the greedflation point and just understand, what your conversations with corporate leaders, particularly those in Pennsylvania, have been like. What have you said to them, and what have they said to you? And what's the plan through your leadership to kind of get us away from that, particularly here in Pennsylvania?
Well, look, corporate leaders in our state and around the country don't like me talking about it, to be blunt about it. It's one of the reasons, one of two or three reasons why they're funding a super PAC helping my opponent. It's the largest individual super PAC in the country for any Republican or Democratic candidate. Might be the largest in history for one candidate. They're on track to spend at least 50 million, and this is just a small group of billionaires, a handful of them. It might get to 60 or 70 million dollars. I may have said billion, I meant million. Thank God it's not billions, but it's funded by a group of billionaires, and that's one of the reasons why they're doing that, is because they know that he will vote for their tax breaks in 2025. I will not vote for billionaire and big corporate tax breaks. I've already voted against them in 2017 and a couple of other times. But I'm also the one who's taking on this fight on greedflation. So look, if you're a major corporation across our state or across the country, and you're not engaged in price gouging, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you're going to continue with impunity to jack up prices, like a lot of big companies did, in fact, making it difficult for the local grocer to make ends meet at the local level. But if they're going to continue to do that, then I'm going to continue to come after them and try to hold them accountable with price gouging legislation, and obviously not support efforts that rewards them with these really gross and obscene tax breaks. So I look forward to having further discussions with folks, but they're pretty angry at me right now.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you're used to taking some heat on things. So how about any other questions from our editorial board? Go ahead, Saeed.
Hi, Senator Casey. With that really cost of living, another concern that actually impacts the cost of living is the current issues that we have internationally. So how do you assess the current U.S. strategy in the Middle East, and what changes, if any, would you advocate to promote stability and peace in the region? Because not only there's a human tragedy that is happening every day, and as the leader of the free world, we are expected to take an action. I personally feel that we are not filling those shoes, adequately at the moment. But also this will impact, the expectation is if there's a bigger war, the cost of living is going to triple, maybe quadruple. So what do you think about the U.S. impact in the Middle East, and of course the further impact the economy? Thank you.
Well, Saeed, I think here at home we've got to continue, and I think that whoever wins the presidential election or control of Congress has to further American interests by making sure that we continue to invest in our own national security here at home, in our defense industrial base, and making sure we have the wherewithal to confront any threats around the world to our security. That also means having economic security here at home. That's why it's important to invest in infrastructure. That's part of having a strong national security. That's why it's important to focus on the middle class to grow and strengthen the economy so that we're strong here at home, and invest in families, invest in communities, like the policies I've supported. I think internationally, we've got to continue to enunciate basic American values, that we support freedom and democracy and human rights, and we are unalterably opposed to terrorism, and that we're willing to confront directly terrorist threats. And I think right now on the world stage, it isn't limited to two places, but obviously the leading indicators of what we've got to do to ensure security in the Middle East and Europe and beyond is what we're doing to help the people of Israel in fighting back against Hamas. A year and a day ago, where they murdered 1,200 innocent Israeli civilians and continue to threaten the people of Israel. That threat that Hamas poses is not defeated yet, but I think the Israeli government and the people of Israel have made progress, but that's still a continuing threat. And our support for them is critical. Our military support and other support is critical, as I have always supported. In addition to that, the threat posed by Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, which, by the way, I think has killed more Americans than any other terrorist organization in the world. That threat has to be met and defeated. And the Israeli armed forces has made, the IDF and other parts of their armed forces have made good progress in defeating that threat. But the overarching threat in the region, of course, is that posed by the Iranian regime. And so we have to continue to support efforts that Israel undertakes to fight back against that threat. So that's the Middle East. And as we're doing that, of course, we've got to continue efforts to get the hostages home and to help the people of Gaza with food and medicine and medical supplies. We can do all of that. None of those are internally inconsistent, in my judgment. The other effort, of course, that we've undertaken is to help the people of Ukraine stop a murderous dictator, Vladimir Putin, and to make sure that the people of Ukraine are successful in that war against that dictator. The Ukrainian people have to be successful, and there's only two choices here in that conflict. And there's no gray area, there's no in between. You either support Zelensky and the people of Ukraine and their armed forces, or you support Putin. Anything less than that is supporting Putin. And we've got a lot of politicians in Washington who are a little weak-kneed when it comes to defeating Vladimir Putin. He has to be stopped now, or he'll invade Poland, he'll invade other countries that would automatically trigger an Article 5 responsibility by our government to go to war in Europe. That's the choice that we face. If we either stop him now, or we're going to be in a war in Europe, the impact of which we can't even begin to imagine. So that's what I think is at stake. And on all those issues, I've got a very strong record.
Well, let Reverend Sandy Strauss, her hand is up, and I want you to know that Reverend Strauss is being honored by PennLive's editorial board tomorrow with the Peace and Justice in PA Award. So welcome, Reverend Strauss.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to say, I think I saw Jeff's hand go up before mine did. So
that's all right. Go ahead.
I didn't see it here. I saw yours, but he's okay. We'll get to Jeff.
Okay. I guess my question is, it seems pretty apparent at this point that the groundwork is being laid to challenge the outcome of the election if it doesn't go the way that one side hopes it will go, and wondering if that is something that you think will also apply to your own campaign, and what are you doing, or are you doing anything at this point to try to address those attempts to try to challenge should Pennsylvania go the direction that the other side doesn't want?
Reverend, thanks for the question and congratulations on the award.
Thank you.
I think that I'm so focused on winning a tough race, a very close race, that I haven't thought much about the day after. And that's just the nature of being a candidate. I will say this, so I think there's no question that we're going to have a conflict in terms of the challenge of the election afterwards. And I think the candidates on the other side, including the leader of the party on the other side, has made that pretty clear. But I do think that we have the wherewithal, the resources to be able to meet those challenges and to have whatever debate ensues, whether it's in the courts or otherwise, if that were to transpire. I think one of the reasons we're prepared is because of what we experienced in in late 2020 and early 2021. And so I think people are on alert and have made plans to do that. But I'm not a participant in that because I'm a candidate just trying to get to 8 p.m. on election night. But I do think we'll be able to meet, deal with that kind of challenge and resolve it in the way that we always have as Americans.
Jeffrey, I think you had I didn't see your hand up, but go right ahead.
Yeah. Senator, there are many of us, I'm certainly one, that believe one of the causes of inflation is government spending. Do you agree with that? And do you have any plans to reduce government spending?
Yeah, Jeffrey, I know there's a debate about what are the antecedents of the rise in inflation. Fortunately, it's come down a lot, and the Fed is playing a role in that. But I also think that this greedflation debate is an important one to have, because some want to just sideline it and make it a, kind of a Washington debate simply about, appropriation bills. But I don't think there's any question that we've got to continue, and this has to be much more bipartisan than it's been, to ratchet down debt and deficit, especially the long-term implications of a high debt load. If we don't do that, we're going to continue to see, I think, an adverse impact on the economy, and that debt has gone up. Obviously, it went up under both of the last two administrations, by in terms of the total, more in the last 4 years than this 4 years, but it's up too high. I voted for two measures just in the last 2 years that would reduce debt by $1.8 trillion. And that's a step in the right direction, but we've got to do more. But the last thing we can do, I think, and we're going to have a big moment, as I mentioned earlier, in 2025, whether I'm in the Senate or a private citizen, there's going to be a big tax debate. And that might be the most important tax debate in 25 years, because that will determine whether or not we're going to invest in the middle class, invest in families, and invest in kind of the middle of our economy, or whether we're going to continue on the pathway that too often has won the day in Washington, which is huge corporate tax breaks, huge breaks for billionaires and people making hundreds of millions of dollars, to the detriment not just of families, but also to the detriment of reducing deficit and debt. So yes, I think we've got to continue to ratchet down deficit and debt, and it's got to be a bipartisan effort.
Great.
Gloria, very good. Your hand's up. Go right ahead. Gloria Merrick.
Good morning, Senator. It's nice to see you again. I've enjoyed seeing you these last couple months, being represented here in our Latino community, and coming here and talking about what you're doing, in particular to those issues that really hit home close to our community, the lower prescription drugs and the child tax credits. So thank you for that. My question is around we're all being bombarded with ads. And if you could rebuttal one thing that's being said about you in these ads that we're being bombarded with, what would that one issue be? If you could rebuttal one, what would that be?
Gloria, do you only have one?
Well, that's true. We get bombarded every 10 minutes. We're seeing these ads.
I had more hair when this race started, but the pounding has evaporated some of my hair. But no, I think the one attack that's among the most misleading is on border security. Look, I've got a really strong record on this. Number one is supporting over and over again measures, more than 25 votes actually, over and over again, supporting measures to invest in border security, including the most recent, which was this year. We had I won't call it a golden opportunity because that overstates it, but we had a substantial or a significant opportunity to begin to make investments at the border that we need, especially at ports of entry. And that was the bipartisan border security bill that I voted for now twice, and my opponent opposes. And the reason I support it is because it had features or elements of that bill that would help on a number of fronts. First of all, hiring something in the order of almost 2,000 more Border Patrol agents. That would help a lot, both with regard to dealing with folks coming across the border in violation of the law, but also dealing with, and you need personnel for this, dealing with the fentanyl problem, which is mostly a vehicle problem. Fentanyl coming through ports of entry in vehicles, cars and vans and huge trucks and other vehicles, coming through ports of entry packed with fentanyl in compartments, and it's packed into spare tires, packed into different parts of the vehicles. That's where most of the problem resides. The bill also would help on the question of asylum, toughening up the asylum rules, number one, but number two, investing in the system so that much more prompt determinations can be made about someone's asylum claim. What we're having now is people coming across the border and walking right into the arms of authorities and declaring asylum, and then they're on an asylum track sometimes for not months, but years, and there's no determination made of their status. And as you know, in most cases, most asylum claims when they're finally adjudicated are not successful. But that should not take years. The reason it takes years, the reason there's chaos in that system, in addition to the larger issues on the border, is because we haven't invested in those systems to make those determinations about asylum claims, investing in the screening technology at the border that would reduce the flow of fentanyl. We've already seen a diminution of that over the last couple of years, but we got to do a lot more. And that's by having more screening technology and more personnel and more resources. Some of the fentanyl, a lot of the fentanyl is detected by the technology. Some of the fentanyl is detected by agents and dogs sniffing, the dogs sniffing in the cars and vehicles and finding that fentanyl and intercepting it. But we need a lot more resources. That's why the Border Patrol supported it. The Border Patrol Union, which last time I checked, I'm not sure they've ever supported a Democrat in a campaign, certainly not the presidential level. The Border Patrol Union supported it and are pleading with us to give them more resources. And the other side said no, because their candidate for president wanted to have an issue rather than begin to solve the problem. This should be the subject, as it was for a period of time, a couple of days or weeks at least, the subject of broad bipartisan consensus. Before Donald Trump issued that edict for Republicans not to support the bill, I think there would have been at least 15 Republican votes. Some people believe as many as 20 Republican votes for that bill. That was wiped out by his edict to say don't support this bill because he thought he would have a political advantage by continuing not to have investment at the border and especially at ports of entry to stop fentanyl. So I think that's a big misconception. I could take you back even further to the bill that we passed in the Senate with 68 votes that I voted for proudly, which was a comprehensive bill, but contained within that bill were two things on border that are relevant today, and I think are part of the reason we have the problem today. $45 billion in border security investment would have been part of the investment in that bill, but it died in the House. Remember, 68 votes in the Senate, no vote in the House. They blocked it in the House. It didn't even have a vote. $45 billion in that bill, but also a requirement in the bill that there would have had to have been, before any other provisions went into effect, a certification by Homeland Security and one other agency. It's escaping me now, but Homeland Security certification that the border was secure before any other parts of the bill went into effect. So it would have been a substantial investment in border security more than a decade ago that would have helped us today enormously. So I've got a good track record, and that's part of my rebuttal to the ad.
Thanks, Gloria. Dr. Joshi, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you, Senator, for making the time. I have a quick comment and then a question. I think you would agree that we're at a point, in our country where it's facing sort of unprecedented challenges from a variety of fronts, and many of them are obviously very, very complex issues. But then when you hear politicians, both on the right and on the left, talking about those issues, there seems to be dogma around solutions. I've got this, I know this, and I can fix this, right? It's pretty black and white as opposed to shades of gray. And what that ends up doing, in my opinion, is that these thorny issues can best be resolved by dialogue and coming to the middle, being able to have a healthy debate where both parties are willing to come to the middle. Increasingly, for a variety of reasons, instead of coming to the middle, both candidates and parties at the local level and the national level, and that has trickled down to the communities at large, they have gone away from the center to each of their respective sides, extreme right, extreme left, and there seems to be nothing in the middle, right? What I think, having led organizations in healthcare, I believe answers almost always are in the middle. So as an example, if you take the Affordable Care Act, there are some things that are absolutely amazing about it, and there are some things that are terrible about it. Similarly, you take fiscal approaches to solving, debt or what have you. There are some great things about Plan A. There are some great things about Plan B. You probably know where I'm going. The drift is, what would you? That's the question, I guess. Each one of us, I think, has a responsibility to tone down the rhetoric so we have an opportunity to have a civil dialogue and debate where we're able to come to the middle. The answer doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, lie if we're trying to solve a fiscal problem to say everything is related to corporate greed on one end, to the other extreme where everything is related to the other extreme of that solution. What would you, or what is your approach going forward to be able to accomplish what I just said, which I believe is a critical part of moving forward as a country? What would your efforts look like in an approach to get people to talk to each other more on both sides so they can come up with solutions that actually mirror people's solutions on the ground, as opposed to making extreme statements from a podium that then are going down, trickling down to people, and it's happening. It's beginning to happen in dining tables across the country, dinner tables across the country, where people are so darn polarized that it's like impossible to have a debate about something. I'll pause there.
No, it's a great question because, look, I think in terms of the public officials that debate issues, but also as citizens, as part of a society, kind of one general rule that I try to follow and probably violate it here and there is don't be categorical. It's one thing to say I disagree with you on this issue and let's talk about that, or even argue loudly in a very animated fashion, and go back and forth, figuratively speaking, punching back and forth on issues. But don't extend the argument by saying, well, if you believe that, then you're an evil person and your whole family's evil. That's kind of where politics gets to one of these often. So I think being less categorical, I think that's a good rule to follow. And I could tell you some stories about that, but I won't, about how we can refrain from that. But I think in terms of the substance, I'll make the case for myself. I think I've been part of a lot of successful bipartisan efforts, sometimes as part of a larger group that fashioned consensus, sometimes just senator to senator working out support for a bill. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, a larger example is the infrastructure bill. I mean, presidents of both parties, Congresses of both parties have been talking about infrastructure for 50 years and got very little done other than the annual appropriation for transportation funding, for example. But by getting a whole new layer of infrastructure investment, we had to work out this deal. And that was a bipartisan effort. We had to get 60 votes in the United States Senate to do it. The president's team worked very hard, and a lot of us participated in that to get it done. The investment in Pennsylvania is almost incalculable. I mean, I can take you to any one of the 67 counties, and in almost every county, there's an example of infrastructure investment, either from the bill or from the infrastructure investments that were in the American Rescue legislation, which is now long forgotten, just from 2021. So that was an example of where Washington came together and no one was betting on us doing that. The other example, I think, is on chips and science, which is a major investment in our efforts to gain an advantage on semiconductor production to get ahead of China and to not be not lose that competition. And that was largely bipartisan. Now I'll just go to some individual examples. I'm working now with John Cornyn from Texas, and I have for years now worked with John to fashion a consensus on having notification provided by American companies when they want to invest in China or other countries of concern, but principally China, so that if you're going to make a huge corporate investment in China and it involves certain sectors like artificial intelligence or hypersonics or other sectors that involve our national security, we've got to know about it. We have to know about it and make an assessment as to whether or not that investment is going to undermine our security. That measure. Now, I wanted to go further. I wanted to stop some of these transactions. We could get the support for that, but that's different or scaled down version of just notification, as opposed to being able to stop transactions. That received 91 votes in the United States Senate. The House hasn't passed it yet, but we need to pass that. And it's also, I think, a big difference between my record and my opponents. He was not only investing in China, China's military, China fentanyl company, a lot of investments in Chinese oil and steel companies, but he's making a lot of money doing it. So I've been fashioning consensus that's bipartisan on a critically important feature of our national security. Another example is when I worked with Bill Cassidy from Louisiana. We passed a measure to protect women in the workplace who were working and pregnant and didn't have the full measure of protections that, for example, that we brought into law for people with disabilities in the workplace in 1990. So in essence, providing the same protection for a pregnant woman in the workforce as we provided for a worker with a disability in the workforce. So I got that done with Bill Cassidy. He stuck his neck out to work with the other side and get that done. I could go down the list more, but I won't. But so I think that there are examples in my work that indicates that I work on that to try to arrive at bipartisan consensus. But there's no question we can all do more.
So are there any other burning questions from either any of the reporters or the editorial board?
I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Benny.
All right. Hello, Governor Casey. People with disabilities do appreciate your support on the federal level. I just heard that there was a Supreme Court decision that sort of goes against the Olmstead decision, and unfortunately, I can't think of the name. But there are some fears out there that people with disabilities will not have the right to live in the community if someone decides that they're better off in an institution, and those rights won't be guaranteed anymore. So I just would ask you to keep your eye on that, and if there's anything you could do to bypass that. The other thing that I wasn't there, but I saw it on video, the Transportation Committee hearing. And we talked about, of course, we all know the problem for transportation for people with disabilities, but especially those who live in the rural counties. And that goes for everyone in the rural counties. And they were talking about food deserts and how difficult it is to get to grocery stores. Also, they were talking about SEPTA was there, and they were talking about competing with other states for conventions and other national events. That maybe Chicago, they would go there instead of Philly because of the transportation situation. That SEPTA, if SEPTA was a little better, we could get those people here in Pennsylvania for the money. And so my final comment, I mean, these are issues you could respond to, is when people talk about government spending, red flags go up for me, because usually that means cut social programs. And I think that we all disagree, not all, but most, on how to cut government spending. But I caution to keep an eye on the social programs that keep people thriving in their community.
Senator Casey, I don't know how much time you have, but at least if we can answer that one and then give us a little gauge on how much time you have left.
Yeah, maybe Emma can tell us the time.
Okay.
Emma, I don't know if Emma can hear me say that, but
She'll chat with me. She'll send me.
okay. But Vinny, I want to thank you for raising those issues. I'll try to answer them in a broader summary fashion, but appreciate your advocacy for people with disabilities. I think we're making some good progress if you look at the last number of years, but even if you look at over a long period of time. Obviously, the foundation of major progress was the Americans with Disabilities Act, the goals of which we still have not fulfilled. And one of those goals is independent living, so that people with disabilities decide where they live and how they want to live. And we've still got some work to do on that. I think one of the substantial steps forward, if we can get there, we're not there yet, but we've put this issue kind of on the front burner of debate, is home and community-based services, so-called HCBS, not to be confused with the network, but HCBS. Those home and community-based services, both for seniors and for people with disabilities, are critical. And what I did was put together legislation to make that a reality. In fact, a series of bills to make that a reality. And I think the answer here is to use the Medicaid program to make those investments, and also to make sure that when we're doing that we have it offset. We can't, to fulfill this goal, we can't run up debt to do it. So we're going to have to find offsets to pay for this. But the critical focus there is making sure that a senior or a person with a disability can have the care that they need in the home or in their community. As you know, a lot better than I do, probably based upon your experience, so many people with disabilities can lead a full life if they get a little bit of help. Sometimes help in the morning, getting ready for school or work or whatever they're going to do in the day, and the rest of the day they're pretty much on their own. They can get to the bus and they can get transportation, which I know you've raised as a separate issue, which I want to speak briefly to. But so investments that allow people to make that decision, or to have ownership of that decision, to stay in their homes in the community where they feel they're closer to their family and can live a full life. We haven't made that transition yet from having only one option in America. And the one choice, the one option is a residential care, nursing home, institutional care. Now, for most people, that'll be just fine. But for a lot of people, they don't want to go there for different reasons. And most nursing homes do good work, but there's a percentage of them, fortunately, so far as I know, single-digit percentage that don't do a good job, and we've got to make sure they're held to a higher standard. But that choice to be able to stay in your home for long-term care or to stay in the community is critical. I saw it with my own mother. She was able to, in the last 2 to 2.5 years of her life, to have care in the home, and it made all the difference in the world in her life. Every American should have that opportunity. Also, we've now updated my ABLE legislation from 2014. We've now added to it so the age at which you acquire your disability has been raised from 26 to 45, so that if you acquire a disability in your 30s or early 40s, you can still have an ABLE account to save for a disability, just like we save for college. In essence, a 529 plan for people with disabilities. So that's helped, I think, to give people with disabilities more resources to be able to save in a tax advantage way over time. Obviously, protecting Medicaid is critical. Even if we never get to what I'd like to do, just protecting the Medicaid program and the integrity of it from cuts that have been proposed over and over again is going to be critical to helping people with disabilities. Last point I'll make on transportation. I hear you on the need for more investment, and it's as much a SEPTA southeastern Pennsylvania problem, but it's also a problem, as you mentioned, in rural communities. Sometimes county transportation systems don't have the resources that we need, so we have to try our best to be responsive. The American Rescue Plan, I would argue, made really substantial investments in transit that we've never seen, and not just in cities, but in a lot of rural communities. But we need to fashion, I hope, a bipartisan consensus of directing transit dollars to rural communities to help people with disabilities and to help seniors.
Great. I just ran a letter to the editor from someone complaining about mass transit in central Pennsylvania. So it's not just rural communities. We need some attention here. Reverend Strauss, your hand's up.
Yes, my question is about what's been happening now with the weather. We've been dealing with the unexpected aftermath, of course, of Helene, which has been devastating in areas that we never expected to see that kind of devastation in. And now we're looking at this new storm coming in, Milton, which is threatening to be devastating for a lot of areas as well. I think this is a climate issue, but really the bigger issue at the moment is that we're facing costs to prepare people for these kind of storms and to rebuild way beyond what we ever experienced in the past. What are your thoughts on what needs to be done to ensure that we have the resources to protect these areas, those who are being affected moving forward, especially as this seems to have become such a contentious issue?
Yep, Reverend, it's a great point. I think you hit on a couple of elements of it in your question. Number one is, if you're a federal legislator, don't vote against disaster assistance. That shouldn't be a high bar. But too often you have members of the House and the Senate who have voted against disaster assistance for other parts of the country. We are one country, we're one nation, one people. And when one group is hurting, whether it's in Florida or North Carolina, a legislator from Pennsylvania should work to support them. We had a lot of members of Congress who voted against funding for Superstorm Sandy because it was in 2012, because it was New York. That is wrong. You've got to support disaster assistance, because all parts of the country, if it's a tornado in the Midwest, or if it's what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks on the East Coast or in the South, we have to be supportive. Secondly, combating climate change is part of this. That's why the legislation passed in 2022 will help us reduce emissions with these tax credits, which, by the way, these tax credits for clean energy are helping Republican states more than Democratic states, probably, in states where none of the members of Congress voted for the bill. It's creating a lot of jobs, and it's also helping us combat climate change. Thirdly, it's an infrastructure challenge. That's why this infrastructure legislation that we passed is going to help over time. It's not going to be immediate. It's not going to be something that will be manifest right away. But over time, by fortifying our infrastructure, repairing or rebuilding basic infrastructure, helps us with this. The volume we're talking about, volume of water, for example, that infrastructure built 30, 40, 50 years ago, we weren't contemplating because of the ravages of climate change. So making investments in infrastructure, and we're going to have to come up with, I believe, another infrastructure bill down the road. I don't think it's going to happen the next few years, but probably 10 years from now, we're going to have to be thinking about another major investment in infrastructure and being able to pay for that, to make the right investment. So I think those three elements, dealing with climate change, supporting disaster assistance, and supporting infrastructure investments are all critical.
Well, great. Thank you. We're approaching the end of our time, and I do want to throw one final question to you, Senator Casey. As you know, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, right? And really got to know there are good people there. all kinds of great innocent people who are suffering. So I want to give you this opportunity. You did speak very warmly and sincerely about our support for Israel, American support for Israel, but there are other people there too. There are Palestinians, there are Lebanese, and many of them have families in our region.
Yeah.
You want to take this opportunity to talk to them as well.
Oh, sure. Look, the American people through our tax dollars have provided a lot of help. I know the military aid to Israel, or military aid generally, is always a story that's written, and there's always an emphasis on that in terms of coverage. No disrespect to the press here, but sometimes that gets a lot more press than humanitarian assistance. But you know, the legislation we passed, and it was held up, as you know, for months. The legislation that invested in support for Ukraine and Israel, and had a lot of elements to it, or features to it, that pushed back on the Iranians pretty aggressively, also had an awful lot of humanitarian assistance, and not only for Ukraine and other parts of the world, but in particular for the people of Gaza. More than, if memory serves me, more than $1.5 billion, in addition to continuing support over time. So we've got to continue to provide that help, to rush food assistance and medicine and medical supplies to people that are caught in an awful crossfire in that conflict or in any other. And I think the American people on a regular basis provide that kind of support for places around the world, whether it's in Africa or in the Middle East or otherwise, in addition to the military support.
Have you thought through at all what your position is once this fighting stops? What should be for example, do you support a two-state solution, or have you not thought through that yet?
I do, but I think we have to add a more emphasis on the security dimension for Israel, and I would call it, if I can come up with my own name, I'd call it a two-state security solution, because obviously, I think what was envisioned before may not reflect the reality on the ground. That threat now is to Israel is elevated and made most manifest by the horrific attack of a year and a day ago, but also the ongoing threat to Israel in the region. All of the threats that we know have surrounded Israel for 75 years have now played out in large measure, not fully, and I hope that none of them play out the way that they could. But the threat of Hamas, the threat of Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shiite militias in the region, and the Iranian threat, all are clear and present dangers. So I think we're going to have to rethink, I think, in any kind of two-state formulation, beefing up and amplifying that security dimension.
And I'm assuming you would agree, beefing up and amplifying security for the other people as well, meaning that they have a chance for a future. Is that at all in the equation?
It has to be. We look at 2 states for 2 people means that both have to be able to live in with peace and security and self-determination. But that's going to be that in the present context, the present reality, it's going to be hard to arrive at. I don't see it over the horizon. I do think, though, that one of the real advancements in the last administration was the Abraham Accords. That gives us a foundation for alliances in the region between Israel and between and among other countries in the region that helps provide a foundation for whatever transpires in the Middle East. And we've got to continue to have or undertake efforts to build those alliances. I think you saw some of that in a brief moment, but it was an important moment in April, the middle of April, when the Iranians were attacking Israel, and it wasn't just the Americans helping with intercepting the rockets and missiles, in addition to what the Israelis were doing, but you had the Jordanians and getting help from others in the region. We've got to continue that, not just in a security fashion or in a moment of a threat to Israel's security, but also in terms of economic, the economic relationship between and among nations in the region. So I think there's some prospect there to build upon that, but obviously that will depend upon the resolution of this conflict and the resolution of the broader regional conflict.
Well, we've talked about everything: domestic, international, global security, everything. So thank you. Our time is up with Senator Casey. We appreciate your taking time as you're campaigning there for a re-election to be with us here at Penn Live. So with that, we thank you, and you are free to continue campaigning. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
Joyce.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Bye.